Some stories disappear, some are erased, and some are waiting to be uncovered. The Dark Bureau.
Money is not always what it seems. Dollar signs blink between screens around the planet, flowing seamlessly and invisibly. And yet the true hands behind those digital transfers almost never leave the shadows. Each day, billions travel along invisible wires, flagged as routine, blending into the regular cadence of global commerce. But every so often, a single, almost imperceptible click pierces the boundaries between order and exploitation. What remains hidden from the surface, what financial institutions and ordinary users perceive as the efficient normality of modern banking, is undercut by a structural paradox. The very technologies engineered to create stability in commerce have opened pathways for a deeper, more elusive disorder. This is where phantom networks thrive, lurking between the keystrokes and authentication requests, engineering chaos so quietly that their reach is measured less by the rare disruptions than by the weeks, months, even years of undetected extraction. A world in which what most see as the regular pulse of global business is quietly haunted by an invisible, persistent truth. To open the case file on Africa's covert phishing syndicates is to step beyond the visible actors, beyond audit trails, beyond official accounts, and into the backrooms, internet cafes, and digital alleyways where these shadow organizations operate their silent machinery. Across continents, their pathways cross and merge, becoming a map of fractured cyber cells whose collaboration does not require shared loyalties, uniforms, or even mutual trust. Instead, the system forms by necessity, a system of transnational deception enabled less by mastermind design than by relentless adaptation, agility, and a flexible approach to risk and opportunity. We trace not a single syndicate, but an ecosystem, fragmented, decentralized, and perpetually in flux. To measure its scale, we must first zoom out. For every intercepted payment flagged for review, there are dozens, sometimes hundreds, that move through undetected, untouched, perfectly camouflaged among the millions of daily transactions that define global markets. The visible tally of criminal activity forms only the superficial layer of a phenomenon that quietly bleeds into the lifeblood of commerce, moving through unsuspecting accounts, business software, and legitimate logistical channels. Time-lapse images of business offices, stacks of invoices processed in bulk, and endless out-of-focus emails highlight just how intimately the system operates alongside and within the machinery of business as usual. Meanwhile, in government buildings and enforcement offices, energy is poured into chasing a shifting trail of anomalies. Auditors and investigators follow data that never stands still. But the architecture below is not merely organised crime. It is a granular, distributed network, flexible enough to outpace static countermeasures and diffuse enough to weather the fall of individual operators or cells. In crowded urban internet cafes, where the physical conditions are as changeable as the digital threats, emails are drafted, scripts refined, and phishing campaigns launched under the indifferent flicker of fluorescent lights. The practitioners within are rarely masterminds in the Hollywood sense. Instead, patchwork syndicates emerge, marked not by rigid hierarchy or familial loyalty, but by pragmatic alliances formed through shared needs and complementary skills. Experienced operators train new recruits, sharing tips about the latest software vulnerabilities or the most convincing social engineering ploys. They exploit weak points scattered through layers of digital infrastructure, from under-defended corporate invoice servers in Western Europe to poorly patched supply chain portals in India or Asia, to overlooked connection points inside high-volume trade hubs. The rules that define their collaboration are fluid, based on speed, shared gain, and above all, operational discretion. As criminal innovation flourishes, patterns begin to emerge. Local teams compromise small-scale businesses, leveraging them as quiet entry points into much larger corporate ecosystems. The capture of a single employee credential, an email password, a half-secured login, now becomes a passkey into sprawling global networks. Once an account is compromised, its journey through the dark web is swift. The syndicates transform them into conduits and cover, their activity weaving invisibly into a fog of legitimate transactions, where a fraudulent transfer can hide safely amongst legitimate remittances or supply payments. Tactics are in constant refinement. Technical exploitation, malware, phishing links, keystroke loggers, is interwoven with social engineering, the latter often proving the sharper weapon. In this context, an overworked clerk who clicks a spoofed invoice link or an understaffed IT worker distracted by multiple tickets can inadvertently create an opening that sophisticated software alone would never yield. Each successful crime is not simply an end in itself, but a feedback loop. Intelligence about what worked, which vulnerabilities yielded the most, and how quickly a breach was detected feeds back into the organisation. Lessons are shared quickly via encrypted chat groups or dark web forums, ensuring that the network remains agile and constantly evolving. When law enforcement intervenes, and inevitably they do, the surviving cells scatter, abandoning known codes, devices, and sometimes even operatives. The alliances are pragmatic and rarely personal. New participants are recruited at the margin, and the syndicate reforms with a different digital fingerprint and new access points, staying one step ahead of those who track them. For authorities, this is not a static adversary, but a moving target whose true structure is defined by absence as much as presence. In the heart of this machinery is choreography, the movement of stolen funds across borders and continents through networks of money mules, offshore entities, and complicit facilitators. Often, the mules themselves are unaware of the true nature of the transactions, lured by promises of easy side income, or recruited through smaller scams before being drawn into the broader operation. Stolen funds are routed through shell companies in Western Europe, dummy corporations in West Africa, and even seemingly legitimate enterprises in North America. Forged documentation underpins these journeys, with trade invoices and customs forms manipulated by digital forgers to escape regulatory scrutiny. As the money moves between jurisdictions, the speed of transfer and the number of intermediaries renders traditional financial boundaries almost meaningless. The infrastructure, decentralized by design, protects the operators by ensuring that no individual group or syndicate maintains total control. The system exists as a constellation of loosely connected cells, each balancing their own risk and maximizing reward, incentivized by both proximity to the money and the ability to disappear without a trace when trouble brews. Structural analysis reveals that law enforcement, even as it becomes more sophisticated, is forced to confront a tangled web rather than a monolithic adversary. Financial records blur through anonymized ledgers. What begins as a single fraudulent invoice in a small business in Accra may pass through encrypted messaging apps, be converted to cryptocurrency, rerouted via rented servers in Dubai, and ultimately withdrawn at an ATM in Berlin. Task forces are assembled, multinational collaborations invoking the jurisdictional power of Interpol, Europol, and local teams in Ghana, Nigeria, and other hotspots. In joint operations, they recover stolen assets, freeze suspicious accounts, and on occasion, infiltrate syndicate meetings or intercept entire operational cells. Yet success is never final. New variants of the scam appear almost as soon as old ones are flagged and purged. The evidence trail grows cold quickly, obscured by rotating SIM cards, disposable burner phones, and the constant churn of new digital identities. Institutions caught in the crossfire, banks, logistics providers, regulatory authorities, face a continual process of adaptation. The traditional model of law enforcement, which depends upon clear hierarchies and known kingpins, breaks down under the weight of this adversary's fluidity. Each investigation is a race against technological obsolescence, with defenders forced to update their strategies at the same pace as the criminals invent new attacks. Victories are tangible but always partial, as subsequent breaches often expose gaps in the most robust defences. Banks invest heavily in AI-driven fraud detection, but those systems too can be gamed or subverted once their underlying logic is mapped. Regulatory authorities in both Europe and Africa respond by drafting new statutes, stricter verification, mandated reporting, stepped-up cross-border cooperation, balancing at all times the twin imperatives of financial inclusion and airtight security. This provokes debate, even tension. Too much control risks freezing out legitimate business. Too little enables greater exploitation by cyber criminals. The system's effects ripple through society. For small businesses caught up as victims or unwitting facilitators, the costs are significant and long-lasting. The immediate aftermath, frozen accounts, forensic audits, insurance entanglements, gives way to a more enduring skepticism about the safety of participating in global trade. Public awareness campaigns try to stem this tide, pushing financial literacy, safe computing habits, and early warning signs into the consciousness of ordinary citizens in Accra, Lagos, Nairobi, and beyond. On the international stage, financial relationships absorb the strain, as regulators and institutions debate the necessary sacrifices and compromises. Meanwhile, the private sector works to strengthen internal processes, introducing multi-factor authentication, enhanced employee training, and more rigorous verification protocols, but are at a structural disadvantage against adversaries whose only constant is change. At a systemic level, the impact goes beyond financial loss. Trust itself, the very fabric of global commerce, frays one breach at a time. Employees, often without knowing, become part of a much larger and more sinister apparatus, quietly complicit in operations that span continents. Institutions too are forced to reckon not just with loss, but with reputation. After every scandal, after every well-publicised breach, they strive to repair protocols, assure customers, and harden defences. But the architecture of fraud, relentless in its adaptation, always seems to stay just out of reach, evolving faster than the institutions tasked with suppression. Resilience becomes both an institutional and social imperative. The story is as much about the mechanics of deception as about the necessity of adaptation, how global finance absorbs shocks and recalibrates, how generations of workers and citizens learn the rules of a new, high-stakes game. Eventually, the process of exposure, analysis, and adaptation shifts the narrative. Each layer of the machinery mapped, each previously invisible wire brought into view, reveals not just the scale of the problem, but the underlying complexity of the system itself. The story extends beyond criminal ingenuity or technical sophistication. It becomes a study in the resilience of digital systems, the ongoing arms race between attackers and defenders, and the deep ambiguity embedded in the promise of technological progress. Investigators, system administrators, and everyday users are all drawn into this shifting terrain, where the boundaries between threat and target, predator and prey, become blurred. The investigation ends not with a villain unmasked, but with a mirror held up to global commerce itself, exposing vulnerabilities woven into every transaction, reminding us that the forces shaping trust and risk in our interconnected world are always in motion, always contested, and increasingly difficult to contain.